The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 2, Chapter 981. Meanwhile While Lex was absorbing the information about the inn and the new realm, the universe had not stopped, and some other significant events happened to take place around the same time. A young acolyte looked at his notebook with a frown. His own writing filled the last dozen pages, but he had no recollection of writing them. But it must have been him, because the pages were filled with the story he had written down from a character he had visions about, the Warbringer. When did I even write these? He asked himself, feeling confused. The only possibility he could come up with was that he went to a place called the Chamber of Secrets in the Midnight Inn he visited. Over there, he could delete memories from his own mind. But what was the point of removing his memories if he wrote about the Warbringer in his journal, and would find it eventually? The only possibility he could come up with was that he saw something extremely dangerous, and someone else had warned him to remove those memories. That way, he would not know of them until he opened his journal again. So, was it safe now to read these? It had to be, otherwise he would not have recorded it. Feeling a tinge of nervousness and excitement, he began to read. Fed up of war, he left his lands of origin. But in the wake of the Warbringer's departure, sanity was forsaken, and the dogs of war were let loose. The humans and mammoths forsook their accords. The Marzuan devils brought hell to the lands. Rumors abound of dragons leaving their lairs on the hunt for a dwarf, and an enemy of their race. The caretakers and masters of the realm were themselves caught unprepared, for an enemy in the dark began to spread terror throughout their domain. No one knew the answer, but his authority was evident. The dragons emerged from their homes, and their might and terror spread across the realm as they searched for their unknown enemy. As the entire realm seemed to be heading towards madness, the Henali were unable to divert their attention to resolve such issues because they had troubles of their own. A representative from the Versailles Bank had shown up, downgrading the predicted rating for their realm. The consequences of this were absolutely unacceptable to the Henali, but there was nothing they could do. They were losing their control over the realm. The terrorist known as Jeffrey, and more importantly the organization backing him, became vicious thorns in their side as their terrorist activities began to spread farther and farther. The actual devastation they were causing was not as much of a problem as the inability to find them. Such methods spelt danger for the Henali, especially considering the fact that their war with the Fugan was still not making the progress they had hoped. What if the Fugan and that organization partnered up? Considering the threat, the Henali, in their meeting with the representative from the bank, decided to take drastic measures. It would mean sacrificing some of their gains from the origin realm, but it had to be done. While all this was happening, on a certain planet, a certain being finally got their hands on a golden key from the Midnight Inn. But when they tried to use it, it did not work. Instead, some information was transferred to their mind, informing them that the inn was temporarily unavailable due to renovations. Feeling annoyed, the being opened up his group chat to update the quest giver on the status of the quest. Until the key started to work, he would have to remain a prisoner at the inn. His own quest for a dance-off with the Innkeeper would also remain unfulfilled. Chapter 981. Meanwhile While Lex was absorbing the information about the inn and the new realm, the universe had not stopped, and some other significant events happened to take place around the same time. A young acolyte looked at his notebook with a frown. His own writing filled the last dozen pages, but he had no recollection of writing them. But it must have been him, because the pages were filled with the story he had written down from a character he had visions about, the Warbringer. When did I even write these? He asked himself, feeling confused. The only possibility he could come up with was that he went to a place called the Chamber of Secrets in the Midnight Inn he visited. Over there, he could delete memories from his own mind. But what was the point of removing his memories if he wrote about the Warbringer in his journal, and would find it eventually? The only possibility he could come up with was that he saw something extremely dangerous, and someone else had warned him to remove those memories. That way, he would not know of them until he opened his journal again. So, was it safe now to read these? It had to be, otherwise he would not have recorded it. Feeling a tinge of nervousness and excitement, he began to read. fed up of war, he left his lands of origin. But in the wake of the Warbringer's departure, sanity was forsaken, and the dogs of war were let loose. The humans and mammoths forsook their accords. The Marzuan devils brought hell to the lands. Rumors abound of dragons leaving their lairs on the hunt for a dwarf, and an enemy of their race. The caretakers and masters of the realm were themselves caught unprepared, for an enemy in the dark began to spread terror throughout their domain. No one knew the answer, but his authority was evident. The dragons emerged from their homes, and their might and terror spread across the realm as they searched for their unknown enemy. As the entire realm seemed to be heading towards madness, the Henali were unable to divert their attention to resolve such issues because they had troubles of their own. A representative from the Versailles Bank had shown up, downgrading the predicted rating for their realm. The consequences of this were absolutely unacceptable to the Henali, but there was nothing they could do. They were losing their control over the realm. The terrorist known as Jeffrey, and more importantly the organization backing him, became vicious thorns in their side as their terrorist activities began to spread farther and farther. The actual devastation they were causing was not as much of a problem as the inability to find them. Such methods spelt danger for the Henali, especially considering the fact that their war with the Fugan was still not making the progress they had hoped. What if the Fugan and that organization partnered up? Considering the threat, the Henali, in their meeting with the representative from the bank, decided to take drastic measures. It would mean sacrificing some of their gains from the origin realm, but it had to be done. While all this was happening, on a certain planet, a certain being finally got their hands on a golden key from the Midnight Inn. But when they tried to use it, it did not work. Instead, some information was transferred to their mind, informing them that the inn was temporarily unavailable due to renovations. Feeling annoyed, the being opened up his group chat to update the quest giver on the status of the quest. Until the key started to work, he would have to remain a prisoner at the inn. His own quest for a dance-off with the innkeeper would also remain unfulfilled. Chapter 983, Please Don't. At first, Lex was stunned by the flood of information, but it took him only a few seconds to remember that he could handle a much greater load now. When the realization came to him, he finally noticed that, rather than a flood, it was more of a stream. The dissonance between his new qualifications and his perception of what he was capable of was always an inconvenience to get over. But then again, he doubted that the average cultivator would have so many massive jumps in power in a short period of time the way he had. He focused on the information he was getting. Finally, he received some answers, and for once the system had preemptively taken care of one of his greatest concerns. To start off with, the star rating of the realm had increased to 4, despite the fact that it couldn't support high-level cultivators. That was a massive jump in rating from 2.5, but even so the star rating was actually being suppressed due to the realm instability. As the stability grew, the star rating would grow even greater. But there was a catch. This would only be true during the early years of the realm. If it grew and stabilized at a normal rate, then the abundant chaos energy, and every other unique kind of energy that filled it, would go to waste. The only fortunate thing was that this time frame was in the millions of years, so Lex did not even have to think about it for now. That bit of information also told Lex that it was possible to artificially speed up the growth of a realm. He would look into it at a later date. The gravity across the realm was not constant, but on the continent where the inn was, it was on average 3 times that of Earth. But, within the territory of the inn, the system would regulate it for those who could not tolerate it. This was one of the few functions that was still running even now. Speaking of which, Lex was getting tired of calling it the continent that the inn was on and so decided to name it Minara, something he came up with on the spot. Unlike what he had hoped was the case, the beings born in this realm had no real affiliation or connection to the Midnight Inn. Anything that would be naturally born, and was not from a guest of one of his workers, within the newly established territory of his inn would automatically become a part of the inn at birth. But as far as anything that was already born within the realm, before this, there was no connection whatsoever. That meant that the subtle influence as the innkeeper he had over his workers would not be extended to them. Such historical detail was only provided to him because of the significant impact it had to the climate and geography of the place. But even that was a small part of the knowledge he was getting. After all, Minara was the smallest of the 3 continents, and he was learning about them too. The greatest of the 3 continents, which was considerably larger than Minara, had biomes that Lex had literally never imagined before. Many of its areas were more suited to spirits and races with souls and no bodies, as if it were some kind of sanctuary for the dead and the damned. Well, to be fair, just because Lex associated spirits and such with ghosts did not mean they were necessarily damned, but that was besides the point. As a result, Lex decided to name the greatest of the 3 continents Nether. He could imagine expanding to it one day, since it would be a natural home to the many spirits that inhabited the inn. They too were undergoing some kind of evolution. Compared to Minara and Nether, the middle continent did not have any prominent or distinguishing features. Besides being extremely mountainous, it seemed almost ordinary besides the other 2 continents, if one ignored its size. But it was only ordinary compared to the 2. If seen independently, it was a bountiful heaven teeming with life and civilization. In fact, Lex suspected that it contained the greatest population of all the continents. Amidst the torrent of information he was absorbing, a small tidbit reached him informing him of the awakened Tyre. Suddenly Lex sat up straight and accessed all the abilities available to him through the host Tyre. He needed to prevent a majority of the inn's items from coming to life. Even if he failed everything else, he had to at least prevent the dragon from gaining another soul. But the things he could do at the moment was limited, so he had to rely on himself. He teleported over to his personal meditation room where the dragon sat unmoved, absorbing the energy from the realm. All the protections and precautions they had taken before only managed to slow down the energy, not stop it. "Please don't wake up," Lex muttered as he slammed the dragon with his aura and spread his soul sense around it. No matter what, he had to stop it from developing a new soul. Unfortunately, some things just could not be prevented. The dragon's body, which still contained the physical might of a heavenly immortal, trembled. Chapter 984, Countless Newborns. Lex looked up at the dragon as countless feelings filled his mind. A part of those feelings had to do with the fact that he was still receiving information about the realms, and was bewildered to learn that there were unique kinds of volcanoes found within the Midnight Realm that, instead of spewing out molten lava, erupted with a strange blue viscous liquid that rapidly froze whatever it touched. He just knew that, since it was a kind of volcano, sooner or later he would find himself right in the middle of one. Such was his fate. But that entire thought process did not at all interfere with the strong feelings of horror and loss at feeling the dragon tremble. His meditation mat. He didn't want to lose it. Yes, although as a newly born soul, it would be loyal to the inn. Perhaps it would be better to gain a loyal and extremely strong follower now. It could possibly prevent many troubles in the future. But at the same time, the development of his own strength was something extremely important as well. Yet desire alone could do nothing, and his aura suppression did not seem to work either. Vaguely, he felt through his soul sense a fragile soul form deep within the dragon's body. Subsequently, relevant information about his new worker reached Lex, causing him to sigh and lament. The body of the dragon trembled again, but it did not move beyond that. Lex focused on the information about the latest worker he got. Previously, only a single tire from a golf cart had come to life. What were the chances that instead of the entire dragon, only a small piece of it came to life? Like one of its teeth or maybe its scale? But that was not the case. It was indeed the entire dragon that had gained a new soul. But, a strange situation had occurred. Feeling a tinge of doubt, Lex reached out towards the soul with his soul sense and tried to communicate with the newborn. "Help," an alarmed squeaky voice said as it sensed Lex. I'm stuck." Considering the level of fear in that voice, Lex should not have felt amused, but he could not help it. The voice was too adorable. More importantly, Lex gained an immediate understanding of what was happening. In short, it was the exact reverse of what was happening with Zen. Zen was a patch of grass in the midnight inn that had gained sentience and immediately reached the earth immortal level as well. But its body was as frail as ordinary grass, meaning that its body was that of a mortal. Due to the massive discrepancy in levels between its spirit, soul, and body, Zen could not really display any strength and was constantly just worried about keeping itself alive. At least, at the time when it was born. Now, the exact opposite was happening, meaning that this new soul that was born was at the mortal level, but was trapped within a body that far surpassed it. As such, it couldn't control the body at all, and instead became trapped within it. "Do not panic," Lex said, as he quickly thought of a plan that seemed almost perfect. But wasn't this too easy? "I can't move," the squeaky voice said once again, in a panic. What kind of a problem was this anyway? They're tickling me," a hesitant yet thunderously loud voice boomed, shaking the ground itself from just sound alone. "No, we're not," another voice screamed out in self-defense. "It's just really crowded here, we're just trying to move." "You're taking pleasure in tickling me." "I know it," the mountain boomed once more. A number of trees yelled back, in perfect harmony, "We are not." Lex had to suppress his lip from twitching, and from facepalming. Was this really the issue he was resolving? He waved his hand and the trees that had gained life teleported to the foot of the mountain, forming a forest of their own. "Oh, this is much better," they exclaimed, once again in perfect harmony. Was the inn about to gain a choir of singing trees? But he did not have time to dwell on this. The massive spaceship had, of course, also gained life. The problem was, Lex teleported over to the side of the massive ship, hugging the ground and wailing. Upon investigating what the situation was, he learned, to his great dismay, the ship had come to life while it was flying. But the new life that inhabited it had a great fear of heights, and was incredibly startled when it learned it was flying, resulting in the current situation. He was dumbstruck. How could a ship be afraid of heights? There was no answer for such a question, nor did he have the time to ponder it. One after another, more and more items from the inn were gaining life, and each one was creating some kind of scene. The lazy river had woken up, and had a severe dislike for anything living riding its waters. Well, Lex couldn't blame it for feeling as such, so he just moved it somewhere remote, and recreated a new, identical lazy river, to replace it. A number of G suits had become sentient, and had run away from their display cases. Lex was only grateful that none of the suits being worn had come to life, or he would have had the harassment scandal of the century on his hands. Somewhere around the inn, a wisp of wind had come to life, and was running wild. Elsewhere, a number of peacocks were undergoing an evolution, and the ones who weren't were protesting out of jealousy. In all his days, Lex had seen many unusual things, but none of them could match what he was seeing now. The worst part was, the day had just started. Chapter 985, Setting Up. To say that the Midnight Inn was experiencing an unprecedented disaster would be an exaggeration. But to say that it had broken all records for the most bizarre situation Lex had ever experienced would be an understatement. The most accurate description of the situation that Lex could think of was to say that he had just developed a great deal of admiration and respect for kindergarten teachers. Dealing with kids was not easy. Around the time that the butterflies in the inn, which had grown in size to be about 20 feet each, decided to identify as a nuisance, Lex decided to pause. He could not keep running from one incident to another. It was not a practical solution, nor would it yield the best results. His initial panic had come from the fact that he had been in a rush to start searching his territory for materials and treasures that could heal the system. But he had to stabilize the situation here first. It only made sense that there would be some unexpected issues with moving to a new place. He needed to delegate tasks and form a management committee. Fortunately, there were plenty of workers who were already in leadership roles. Unfortunately, most of them were still cultivating or experiencing breakthroughs and so weren't available. He needed time to think, but first he sent Z to talk to the Peacock Union and calm them down. Which of them experienced an evolution or not was up to chance, and was not something that could be forced. He searched the inn for workers who were available, and found his options limited. Besides Z, the only one available to him at the moment was Frederick, the Draconian Apostle. Draconian Apostles were the second race of workers made available to Lex, and basically looked like massive honeybees. They found it difficult to survive in normal environments, and instead thrived in extremely hazardous or chaotic environments. Based on that description alone, he vaguely suspected that it may be able to survive in the cosmic sea. But that would need to be tested later on. Frederick was the first Draconian Apostle he had summoned, but considering that he hardly had any guests who needed to survive in extreme environments, he never felt the need to summon too many more. He needed to have more of his workers gain experience in leadership roles, and he could only do that by giving them actual tasks. After all, he couldn't dump everything onto Velma and the usual gang. Speaking of which, a couple more workers had finished their cultivation while he was talking to Frederick, which was perfect. The first was Gawain. As a previously inanimate object that had come to life, he would have first-hand experience in what it was like. He might also know the best way to handle his many newborn workers. Lastly, as someone who was soon going to become a father, and as someone who had adopted a child, he probably had the right mindset to deal with babies. Hopefully. Instead of teleporting the sentient sword over, Lex instead summoned him to himself. This was because he did not want to startle him by suddenly changing his environment. More importantly, he also wanted to let Gawain settle down a bit first. One of the first major setbacks of coming to this new realm was that henceforth, it would be impossible to break through to the immortal realm while in the inn. Even within the designated area of the inn itself, it would be impossible. That meant that while Gawain had gained a lot, his breakthrough had been forcefully suppressed. All was not lost, as the workers could always go to the Temple of Fasting to break through in the future. But it would be a loss for his guests. Then he turned his attention to the second worker who had finished cultivating. It was John. The same John who had a broken system in him, and had lost all his cultivation. Lex sent him a summons as well. Although he didn't plan on absorbing his system right now, because he didn't want to lose the system's functionality while he could still use the host attire. But it was time to set things up at least. Before they could make their way over, however, he was surprised to discover that someone was knocking on the wall surrounding the inn. It seemed like he had his first guest already. Chapter 986 Scary Bee. Lex teleported over to the location where someone was knocking on his boundary wall, and looked over. An animal of some kind, similar to a squirrel with transparent wings on its back, was smashing some unknown object on the wall. For a moment Lex was confused. He could not tell if it was just a random animal trying to crack open some massive nut, or was actually knocking. Since the animal was technically outside his territory, he couldn't even scan it. There was an easy way to find out. With a flock of his hand, the portion of the wall he was on turned into an equally massive gate, which began to swing open. The creature was immediately startled and ran away before the gate could reveal even a speck of the land behind it, but Lex did not stop the gate from opening. He watched as it scurried through the tall grass and hid behind an old, dying tree. Lex teleported away. He didn't have time to watch how the creature behaved, but he was paying attention to this area, so if anything entered through the gates, he'd immediately find out. He scanned the inn for changes, and ignored the countless worker bunnies, which were growing cocoons around themselves. That was a totally normal thing that all rabbits did. He completely saw no reason why he should give it any more attention than the empty suits that were ogling the mannequins in Jeeves' display. Wait, on second thought, he should tell the suits not to ogle. It'd be rude if they started doing that towards his guests later on. While Lex was continuously scanning the inn, and feeling incredibly grateful that at least the missiles in his museum weren't showing signs of coming to life, Gawain finally arrived at his office. "My apologies for the tardiness," the sword in the shape of a man said. He was wearing a Taoist robe, which was a change from his usual attire. But for some odd reason, Lex felt like these clothes suited him more. Despite how horrid the sight seemed, Lex did not interfere yet. He had told Frederick that he could use his means as long as he did not hurt anyone, and up till now, it did not seem like he had actually hurt any of them. "Look, how fun. You're all waiting around in the air, so that I can play with you at my leisure. You really shouldn't have. At first, the bee's words were filled with childlike excitement, but as it paused and looked at the butterflies, its voice changed when it said, "You really shouldn't have." The last sentence, the one that was repeated, was filled with such an immense aura of discontent that even Lex felt that Frederick was on the verge of attacking. But fortunately, it did no such thing. In fact, it actually withdrew its aura, reducing the suppression the butterflies were experiencing. "You see how something I think is a prank does not necessarily seem that way to you?" it asked, as if questioning a child. Technically, the apostle was speaking directly into the minds of the butterflies, but Lex could eavesdrop anyway. The butterflies were all too eager to respond to the apostle, and fawn over it as they claimed to be reborn as saints compared to their prior selves. Its methods were a little drastic, but the inn needed some variety. Not everyone could be extremely friendly, and some with harsher means was not a bad thing. Lex just had to make sure he remained within his limits. As the draconian apostle made its way to the next flutter of butterflies, its freshly re-educated victims followed behind it, as if they were too afraid to leave without instruction. Okay, maybe he was pushing it just a bit. Lex wondered if it was just Frederick that was like this, or was this a tendency shared by all apostles? The latter seemed more likely, for he had no idea what ability it had used to hold all the butterflies prisoner. It was likely some racial ability. Maybe he should add a few apostles to the Midnight Battalion. Chapter 987 about the cultivation mat. From his office, Lex was handling the various situations while standing and looking out the window. Despite the layout of the inn staying the same, the difference was immense. The previous inn eventually became quite large, and the limit of the sky was massive, giving enough room for flying cities, mountains, and ships to hover about above the inn. But even so, now it actually felt like he was in a real world rather than an enclosed space. Up in the sky, there were a number of suns giving them light, rather than a projection of a sun. Though, if one was being technical, the suns in the sky were not stars, but rather a number of orbs of a special spirit crystal that was slowly dissolving in the air. These orbs had unusual properties which made them float high above land, though they were free to move around as they wished. A result of their sometimes erratic movement was unpredictable patterns of light, though there were enough of them in the sky so that Minara had never actually seen night save when the clouds filled the sky. There were enough of the orbs in the air to light this place for a long, long time, so Lex did not need to worry about it suddenly getting dark here. Moreover, as the spirit orbs dissolved, not only did they give off light, they fed extremely concentrated spirit energy into the atmosphere. But the dynamics of the lighting and the depth of the sky were just a small part of it. The Midnight Inn was both hidden and out in the open. It was hidden from the rest of the universe, but once here, it was open for an entire, massive realm. The fact that someone could just walk right up to the inn and come in from the outside world just made it feel different somehow. Even now, from the gate that he left open, Lex could see small animals peeking in, and carefully crossing the boundary to see what happens. Speaking of which, there were countless animals and beasts within the boundary of the inn as well, and many of them were quite dangerous and savage. He would need to establish patrols near the main settlements and give guests disclaimers about venturing, just in case they encountered a dangerous situation. Considering those beasts and animals didn't obey him or the rules of the inn, he more than expected them to cause some minor issues. In the distance, a trail of dust could be seen rising. A number of golf carts had come to life and had gone off-roading. There was no way that could end badly at all. There was a soft knock on his door, before John opened it and timidly stepped in. He had never been the same since his system was destroyed. Originally, Lex wanted to give him space to recover on his own, but now it seemed he needed a push. "You summoned me, Innkeeper?" he asked with a bow. Lex, still looking out at the inn, only nodded and did not immediately answer. Silence filled the room as John began to feel more and more nervous. After a minute, he began fidgeting his fingers. It was at that point that Lex could no longer suppress his sigh. "How long have you been at the inn, John?" the innkeeper asked, turning around finally. "It has been a short while, hasn't it?" John nodded, unable to say anything else. This particular newborn is stuck in a body that's too powerful for him. I need you to design a cultivation technique for him that will strengthen his soul by absorbing the strength of his body. Lex teleported John over to the dragon in his personal meditation room and began to observe John. He had to carefully guide him to ensure his progress goes in the direction that he meant. After all, Lex planned on absorbing the system in just a few more days. That meant he had to ensure that in just a few days, he had to guide John's state of mind to one where he could let go of it. He did not mean to dismiss depression as something easy to cure, for his intention was not to cure it. His intention was to get John to adopt the mindset where he was ready to face challenges to improve his own situation. John was not a weak man. Once he gained some momentum, Lex expected it'd be much easier for him to pick himself back up. In the meantime, getting some exposure to others who had it rough as well might help him get some perspective. In Lex's meditation room, John was teleported over but did not immediately observe his surroundings. He just let out a sigh of relief now that he was no longer in front of the innkeeper. As he tried to rub his eyes, the cold touch of the platinum key on his face gave him pause. When he opened his eyes to observe it, the massive dragon sitting right in front of him gave him a fright. But as he stumbled back, the dragon did not move at all. It did not even respond to his presence, as if he was asleep. While John looked up at the monstrously large being in front of him, a baby teleported over. "John, I'm glad you're here," said Lex, with a smile. "My cultivation mat here has come to life, but it can't move due to the burden of its body. If you can help it come up with a cultivation technique that would weaken the body and strengthen the soul, that'd be great. I'm Leo, by the way, without the disguise. You can call me Lex." You really became a baby," he exclaimed. "Yeah, my body turned to mush. When it healed, I became like this. Nothing I can do about it but grow back up over time, I guess," Lex said with a shrug. Now, about the cultivation mat. Chapter 988 Heroes and Villains Join Together. Since John's cultivation was crippled, Lex had no idea if he could communicate with the soul inside of the dragon's body, so Lex arrived on scene as himself. At the same time, it would not hurt to show John the kind of problems he himself had gone through. Though to be fair, Lex did not doubt that John would have been able to face any other issue without any hesitation. But his entire identity was built based on his system, which is what was causing him to freeze. Lex did not blame him or think little of him. Often it is said that those of older generations have a hard time learning new things. John had already lived so much of life, but had no idea how to live without his system, which was causing him to freeze. But a kickstart to show him it would be okay should help him overcome that hurdle. The most important thing during this time, however, was to keep him thoroughly occupied. If he had free time, then his mind would once again start to wander. At the moment, that was not good for him. Did the innkeeper really give you a dragon as a cultivation mat?" John asked, as he looked up at the dragon and touched it hesitantly. "The innkeeper? No, he just allowed me to keep it. I got the dragon myself." John did not know how to react to that information. For some reason, he was not too surprised actually. It made sense that the workers at the inn were just as absurd as the inn itself. After all, he too worked here, and his past was no less unusual. He was confident that if he kept growing, eventually he would have been able to achieve a similar feat. But from the very first time he entered the inn, and tried out the mystery trial oh so long ago, it had been preparing him to become independent of his system and rely on himself. He turned to look at the baby beside him. If he had been able to achieve such things without a system, then John should be able to try the same, right? Without wasting any more time, they got right to work. Although John had lost his system, he had retained his knowledge. That meant he could still create techniques on his own. But the one he was faced with at the moment was not something he could come up with casually. He would need to study the dragon's body thoroughly. Lex stayed there and helped him through the entire process. But while he himself was there, he also had a projection of the innkeeper in the office working as well. An hour had gone by, and things were beginning to slow down finally. New problems stopped cropping up, at least at the same rate as before. Yes, the rate at which newborns were cropping up had dropped. Now Lex had to deal with those who had been alive prior to exposure to the realm. When Lex went through his star rating increase last time, countless mortal children were exposed to it. That resulted in them undergoing a cleansing of their bodies that simultaneously knocked them out. This time around, the near 3,000 children under the age of 10 that were at the inn did not experience something similar. Instead, they fell asleep, and when they woke up, they had superhuman bodies. So now, thousands of kids were running amok on Main Street, jumping from building to building as if they were superheroes. Of course, when there were superheroes, there were also supervillains. Naturally, when the group of superheroes and supervillain children mixed, they would join forces to take on the real enemy, all sense of order and propriety. There were at least a dozen kids streaking through the streets, and Lex had to limit his oversight of the situation lest the Universal FBI show up and bust him for seeing something he shouldn't. Its body was rapidly growing as it absorbed spiritual energy from its surroundings, and 2 golden wings finally grew out above its back. Its fins started growing longer as well, and its body's shape began to elongate. Lex could not help but scan it. Name, Little Blue. Age, 5. Sex, male. Cultivation details, Foundation Realm Peak. Species, blue whale/evolving, Kuimping variant. Bloodline, evolving. Condition, undergoing metamorphosis. Remarks, this little fish really likes to fly. So Little Blue was evolving into a Kuimping. Lex was not too familiar with this species, but he had once heard Dr. Charles, the same man who had called Fenrir grandpa, mention it. When the opportunity arose, he would take the chance to ask him about it. For now, he was just pleased that Little Blue was doing well. He was about to turn his attention to other things, but Little Blue's evolution was far from simple. The clouds began to react to the beam of golden light rising into the sky, and began to take the shape of various fish. Lightning began to flash all around, though fortunately it never actually struck Little Blue. Outside the bounds of the inn, a noble and immense aura began to spread. It seemed that the inn had suppressed Little Blue's aura within the inn, but its boundary was extraordinarily massive. But besides being extremely prominent, there seemed to be no other problem. Lex once felt grateful that no natural being in this realm was beyond the nascent realm, as this would have caused him immense problems otherwise. But, as if feeling offended at the lack of attention, a green light erupted nearby, and this time the system did nothing to suppress its aura. "Don't tell me," murmured Lex as he observed where the light was coming from. There was only one character that the system failed to rein in. It was the galactic sovereign turtle. True to his suspicions, the turtle was also glowing, and becoming much larger in size at a visible rate. As if on cue, another light erupted from a different corner of the inn. This time, it was the magic carpets. Something was happening with them. Chapter 989 With Great Power. Compared to the turtle and Little Blue, Lex was more concerned about the evolution of the magic carpets. He had not spread the boundary wall to the massive lakes in his territory, for he didn't want to create dams, but right now he was considering it. He knew for a fact that many predator fish lived in those waters, and he did not want them to get attracted by the disturbance among the magic carpet. Just as he was about to raise the dam, he noticed that one magic carpet, which had previously evolved into a massive, mean-looking thing, was protective swimming around the rest. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to avoid building the dam like he initially planned. It was a bold decision, because while he would immediately find out if anything went amiss inside the inn, such as the magic carpet being attacked by anything, he would most likely have to wait for something to occur before he could react. His attention span was severely divided between interacting with John, the system still providing him information on the realm, the kids on Main Street who were by now spreading out just a little. That was not a good sign. A part of him was still also paying attention to the gate he opened because a number of animals were walking in now, exploring the surroundings for anything different. Just as he was considering options, with very few of his workers awake, he noticed a small child who he recognized. Compared to the rest, he was a lot more reserved, though he was surrounded by the largest group of kids. It was Jimmy, the vice leader of the Peacock Warriors. He was also the son of one of his workers, Hera. Lex had an idea, but he didn't act on it immediately. He watched the child who was exploring his newfound strength without ripping trees out of the ground. Instead, he was doing acrobatics with a group of friends. They began by seeing who could jump the highest. But that soon became boring, since all of them could jump nearly to the top of a small building. So then they started to see who could do the most flips in the air. It was then that the kids realized that not only were they much stronger, they also had a massive boost in agility. Their control over their own body was immense, which meant that after a few minutes of trying, each of them could do all kinds of tricks in the air. The lack of difficulty left the kids with a deficiency of stimulation. But kids with nothing to do had great imagination, so then they began to jump off of each other, while in the air, and doing tricks together. I heard he likes the piano, which is why there's one in the manor. My dad made me take lessons for it. I heard he's actually Santa. Good afternoon, said Jimmy loudly, as he bowed to him slightly while he waved at the other kids to be quiet. There's no need to be nervous. I was just observing how well-mannered you are, compared to some more excitable kids. Since you are all so well-behaved, would you like a secret mission? Yes, I want to be a spy, the super protective girl could not help but scream out. Haha, no, it's nothing like that. You see, you, and a lot of other kids, have suddenly received a lot of power. But because of how quickly you all gained this power, not everyone understands that you have to use it safely. With great power, comes a great increase in your parents' babysitting bills. So I want you all to go and talk to your other friends and remind them to be careful so that they don't accidentally hurt someone. Remember, I just want you to talk to them, not pick a fight. What do we get in return? Asked another kid who was trying to seem nonchalant, but it was clear that he was extremely nervous. Lex could not help but smile. Well, I've seen you guys like riding peacocks a lot. If you do well, I'll introduce you to some fish you can ride in the water, just like the peacocks. For the SEA peacocks, one of the kids yelled in excitement and suddenly started running. Influenced by him, the other kids began running as well. Lex could not help but laugh again. They were running in the wrong direction, but they'll probably figure that out eventually. Chapter 990, Sudden Invasion. It was yet to be determined if getting some kids to help calm down other kids would result in absolute total chaos, or if it would help to a degree. Well, he would personally intervene if the situation got out of hand. But that meant this was one more area he'd need to keep his attention focused on. He was just about reaching his limit on multitasking at this point. But he persisted. This was a critical period for the inn. He could not afford to make any mistakes right now. For the next few hours, Lex continued to handle many small and big crises, and kept cropping up. But fortunately, as time went by, more and more workers began to wake up. Almost all of them had reached the Golden Core realm by now, which greatly boosted their strength and capabilities. That also, automatically, placed them near the peak of the entire realm. That automatically ensured their safety, to a point. Besides that, though they had not spent a lot of time training at the temple, they at least began brushing up on the basics of combat. This assured Lex that they would be able to face any and all challenges brought about by the random animals in this realm. Once they began soothing the many newborn, and brought the situation somewhat under control, Lex finally felt like he could go out and begin scouring his territory now. He had little over 9 days left, before he lost the host attire. He had to make the best of his opportunity. John, I'd like to continue helping you out, said Lex in his meditation room. This entire time, Lex had been helping John communicate with the soul inside the dragon, who had been named Pelvalen Jr. But I have received another task from the Innkeeper. Will you be all right on your own? I'll be gone for a while? Yes, don't worry. I won't need your help again until it's time to send the technique to Junior. Now I just need to continue studying to finish up my technique. It's too soon to declare this a paradise. We have yet to ascertain the dangers here. Stop acting like we've already won, and begin securing the area. I do not plan on dying because of your lax security. Fret not, Doctor. There are no threats in the universe that can stand the might of the Empire. Lex stopped listening as he realized something. The energy from the new realm had entered all the minor realms as well. Not only did that mean that the minor realms would undergo a change, but if any civilizations existed within, then it was completely plausible that those civilizations would try to find a means to escape. His mind went to the hundreds of thousands of minor realms left unexplored, and he began to develop a small headache. This was going to be tedious. He looked at the new emerging army once more. No matter what, he was not cool with some random people blasting his territory and trying to expand their empire. But at the same time, he didn't want to waste time on dealing with them himself. He would send Luther with some instructions to deal with them later. Within their realm, they could do whatever they wanted, but out here, they had to obey his rules. If they had an issue with that, then Lex had no intention of being shy with his power. After all, they were the ones who showed up with an army first. But while he dismissed them, for now, he had to delay his departure nonetheless. He had to start checking all the minor realms, starting with the ones which had their entrance in Immortal Bastion. He didn't want to face any more unexpected invasion. Of the many problems he had anticipated, an army coming out of the minor realms was not one of them. Fortunately, minor realms could not usually support very strong beings, so it was not too much of an issue. But with the energy from the new realm, that might change. Chapter 991 Moral Dilemmas. The minor realms within the inn presented Lex with a tricky predicament. They had completely fused with the inn, as was apparent from the fact that they traveled from the origin realm to the new midnight realm. He could also place their entrances freely as he wished. Even actually inside the realms, he felt like he'd gain complete control sooner or later. For the empty realms, he saw no issue in doing as he pleased. But for the minor realms that had civilizations, such as the one that had so boldly attempted to invade the inn, Lex felt like he was in an awkward situation. Even if he wanted to ignore it, and treat it as if it wasn't his responsibility, the knowledge that the entire world for countless living beings was under his control made him feel strangely uncomfortable and burdened. This was something he needed to come to terms with quickly. When he started the inn, Lex knew for a fact that he would come across countless people who might need his help. He did not mind doing charity, honestly speaking, but he mentally prepared himself to keep the mindset that he could not help everyone he came across. Maybe someone more philanthropic would make a greater effort than he had, but he firmly set this boundary for himself. Having said that, he did not stop himself from helping others when he wanted to. He just didn't take the entire burden of their existence upon himself. Now, however, whether he wanted it or not, the control over their entire existence had been placed in his hands. He knew that, eventually, he'd have to face this situation as the inn's influence across the Midnight Realm grew. But suddenly knowing some kind of control over a realm with an entire empire was in his hands made him face the situation much sooner. He was more than happy to just leave them be as long as they stay within their realm and don't break the rules of his and outside his realm. But, hypothetically, if this empire was committing countless atrocities within their realm, should Lex intervene? If he did, how much should he intervene? Say, for example, he deposed the emperor, would the responsibility of setting up a new form of government fall onto his shoulders? Lex suddenly felt bad for the guys stuck here. It would be a while before they returned to the Empire. But, for the Jotun Empire itself, it would not feel as long. Then he moved on. Although he really didn't need to, he checked in on the realm where the inn staff were building their own community. It did not surprise him at all that they mimicked the inn heavily in their construction style. But in general they were doing fine, and there seemed to be no threat of some unexpected invasion from beasts or something. One by one he checked the countless realms. Many of them had undergone drastic changes, with not just the flora and fauna affected by the influx of energy, but the land as well. But fortunately, there were no signs of any threats. Still, he'd have to assign a worker to check up on the realms regularly. As for the rest of the realms, even if he wanted to, he could not manually check over 100,000 minor realms, so he just moved them slightly farther away from his settlements. He gave one last look to the invading army, who had attracted the ire of a nearby beast. Even though the beast was just in the Foundation realm, its body was extremely tough, which meant that they were having a hard time eliminating it. Yeah, Luther would have no trouble negotiating with them. Honestly, even Frederick could probably handle it, but he knew that Luther would enjoy it more. Lex scanned the inn one more time, and things seemed to be calm, so then he turned his attention to the most urgent matter, getting his hands on some goods. He teleported away, and reappeared at the base of the largest spirit crystal mountain within his territory. Deep underneath the mountain, Lex could sense something which was probably very valuable. Chapter 992 Mountain Milk. The Spirit Crystal Mountains were a magnificent sight. Though there was dirt and various kinds of vegetation covering the mountains, the clear crystals were visible prominently from every corner. If you looked deep within the crystal, you would only see a distant darkness, but on surface level it was a mesmerizing sight, nevertheless. The energy concentration here was also extremely high. It was to the point where Lex was almost certain even a normal Foundation realm cultivator would not be able to tolerate it. Heck, even Lex himself felt slightly uncomfortable so close to the mountain, or he would, if he removed the host attire. The air was thick almost, and the wind had a texture which was something he could not wrap his head around. But that hardly mattered. This entire mountain, and everything on it, including even the dirt, was extremely valuable. The grass growing here was almost transparent, with only the lightest green hue, but was better and more valuable than natural treasures that grew in other places. These were extremely premium goods, and one would need to be at the very least in the golden core realm to tolerate them. For example, if tea was made using these grass leaves, then traditional Foundation realm cultivators would explode upon drinking them. Of course, this was only Lex's own analysis, based on his knowledge. It would take proper study to explore the benefits and limits of just this grass alone, not to mention the trees, fruits, and vegetables found growing on this mountain. Heck, Lex was pretty certain that if he took a handful of the dirt here and auctioned it at the Infinity Emporium, it would sell for an immense amount. But that did not matter to Lex. Why would he need money now that he had literal mountains of spirit stones? No, what he needed now was much more valuable. He teleported away, and reappeared around 1,600 feet, 500 meters, below the mountain in a small, underground cavern. His goal was something hidden within the pool of milky elixir. Using his spirit sense, since he didn't want to accidentally spill some of the elixir if he used his hand, he reached into the bowl and took hold of a small, intricately designed necklace that seemed to have formed naturally. Even the string around it was made from metal he did not recognize, but gave off a profound aura as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. Milk of the mountain, Mary muttered in awe, as she appeared on his shoulder. This is good stuff. But I don't recommend you have more than a drop of it before you become an immortal. How much of this you can absorb is limited, and it would be too wasteful to have it now. I'll keep that in mind, Lex nodded as he began to lift the necklace. It was surprisingly heavy, straining him. Can you set aside a drop for me as well? To create my body, I mean. No problem, he replied. This is only the second item you've asked for to create your body with. Just how high quality is the body you're trying to make? It's not about high quality, she answered, with a hint of melancholy in her voice. If I want to recreate a body from my original race, this is just the bare minimum of what I'll need. Even if I succeed, the body will probably be akin to the one I had as a child, at most. Probably not even that, if I'm being realistic. What was your actual race? Lex asked, stunned. It never occurred to him that she wasn't human. I was a celestial. Chapter 993 Treasure Hunting. Lightsville Omicron M. Lex was slightly taken aback by the revelation, though a part of him was relieved that at least Mary was humanoid. What if her original race had been some kind of spider? That would have been creepy. So you want to recreate a celestial body? He asked, while still mainly focusing on pulling out the necklace. That's not possible, at least with your current realm. To do that, my newborn body would have to be at the minimum in the celestial realm, as you call it. No, I'm just trying to recreate a body that has the potential to grow back into that. While I cannot recreate a body with that minimum cultivation level, I can create one that has the same potential and talent, if not somewhat greater, of a newborn celestial. That way I have the hope of returning to my peak one day. Any tips for me, as a former celestial? He asked, almost joking. He knew she was severely limited in what she could do. The only relevant advice I can give you right now is not to underestimate the mythical beings of this realm, she said, very seriously. Although they will be limited by their cultivation realm, their bodies and their abilities should absolutely not be underestimated. They are called mythical for a reason. There is a reason why they are the ones who leave behind legends. Lex nodded. But at that point he finally pulled out the necklace from the bowl, causing the milky liquid to recede from the absolute tip of the bowl. He felt a tinge of nervousness as he reached out to grab it. It seemed like too much to hope that the first item he searched for would be useful for the system, but he still could not help but hope. Unfortunately, it was as he expected. Even when he grabbed the necklace, which was surprisingly heavy, there was no notification from the system. Once again, he put it in the gift shop and learned that it was a relatively brittle metal, but one that was an excellent spirit energy conductor. Perhaps it could be used to make some kind of useful alloy. A good engineer or weapon manufacturer could find a good use for it. As it was, he saw no immediate personal benefit he could gain from it, so he left it in the gift shop for the price of 1 million MP per gram. Even if he did not see the value in it did not mean it was worthless. After all, everything in this new realm was extremely rare. The next place he teleported to was a small pond on an island surrounded by a lake. There were countless strong beasts patrolling the island, as if they were guards, keeping an eye out for intruders. But the strange, metallic liquid that made up the pond still did not give any reaction, though Lex soon found out that it was not a liquid, but a collection of countless microscopic parasites that were controlling every living being in the vicinity. He was tempted to destroy the pool for a moment, but then decided against it. Until he gained a better understanding of the food chain and many intricate environmental systems in the Midnight Realm, it was best he avoided making any drastic changes. Like this, Lex continued to teleport to countless places of interest across his new territory. As demoralizing as it was not to get a single reaction from the system, he somewhat expected it. After all, how could items and materials that the system needed be easy to find? Along the way, at the very least, Lex began to collect countless valuable treasures that would drive ordinary people insane. From fruits that could regrow limbs, to elixirs that could turn a mortal into a cultivator instantly, to life-saving and even life-threatening treasures, he gathered many. But, over the period of the first 18 hours, he still did not find anything that could help the system recover. He was starting to get concerned, but the system itself had stated that the chances of something in the new realm being able to help it recover were high, so he was not ready to give up so easily. He returned to the inn to get some rest and analyze his approach and come up with better ideas. It did not help that, for whatever reason, in this new realm, he was getting exhausted quicker. Chapter 994, Sweet, Evil Potatoes. When Lex returned, the inn had calmed down considerably. A part of it was because, after hours of consistent playing, the kids had become exhausted. They returned to their parents to sleep and get some rest. Jimmy and his friends had also contributed greatly to the cause, though more of that had to do with sharing the incentive of sea peacocks with other kids than anything else. There had been some confrontation amongst the kids as well. Peacock Warriors, which was once the largest group among the kids, had suffered somewhat of a decline after the sudden disappearance of their leader, Layla. Jimmy had been reluctant to declare himself the new leader, though effectively that's what happened regardless. A result of that decline was that the groups formed by other kids felt braver to confront them. Tensions did not break out into fights. They were, after all, just kids. Instead, territories in the daycare/spaceship were traded. The Peacock warriors agreed to stay out of the hangars for smaller ships, a massive sacrifice. All of this helped calm things down. So did the fact that, after so many hours, many parents also woke up from their cultivation sessions. For now, only the weakest of the group had woken up. The same was true for the workers. But nevertheless, the inn was once again at peace. In fact, stating that the inn was livelier than it was back in the origin realm would be a more accurate description. The adults and the older kids were all filled with excitement, and discussed the few moments they'd managed to observe from the platform above the realm. They also compared their improvements, and excitedly explored the new inn. Even with the same layout, it was obvious to all that the inn had changed tremendously. After all, if nothing else, then there definitely was not a group of singing daisies plaiting themselves in the greenbelt beside Main Street. The flowers had newly gained sentience, and apparently could only communicate through song. But the world outside the inn was experiencing massive changes. The three empires underneath the tree received a revelation of the direction of the Midnight Inn from the tree itself. This was a monumental occasion, for it had been centuries since the tree had made any revelations. Immediately, all three empires dispatched ambassadors alongside an appropriate retinue. They needed to understand the innkeeper and his inn before arriving at any conclusions. On the other two continents, none seemed to know or be concerned about the location of the inn save a tribe of eagles, who had also dispatched their champion. Deep in the inn's territory, the invading empire had suffered colossal losses in their first few clashes against the local beasts, much to their surprise. Their technology and weapons fell short against the formidable foes this new land had to offer. But similarly, the carcasses of their defeated foes had much to offer. A single meal on the meat of those beasts had resulted in hundreds of breakthroughs for the surviving soldiers. Instead of being cowed by the difficulty, they became even more intoxicated with the thought of ruling these lands. Elsewhere in the inn, from deep underground, a hidden evil emerged, and began to spread across the land like a plague. Before Lex's nap was concluded, the sentient wild potato had already spread its seed across the lands. In a matter of days, thousands of acres of land would be covered in the growing vegetable. Beasts and animals began to run away and escape those lands as quickly as possible, before they became prey to its malevolent vines. Elsewhere, on the border of the inn, the ground suddenly caved, and from it emerged a team of small, hairy creatures. It seemed like they had found their target, and soon began to climb the great boundary walls. In another corner of the inn, John sat and stared at the notebook in front of him. Dragons were, truly beyond anything he had expected. To weaken one seemed almost impossible. The body was passively restoring itself continuously. It was as if it had an infinite supply of energy. How was a new, feeble soul supposed to weaken it? It seemed impossible. Chapter 995 Resin. Lex had gotten used to using the technique to disable his divination before he slept, but today, before this nap, he tried something different. Instead of trying to prevent vision, he focused on two key words, treasure and system. He was hoping that, through the use of divination, he'd be able to get some clues. He was not depending on it entirely for answers, but it was worth a try. It was one of the reasons he wanted to wake up after only a couple of hours, lest he be completely drained when he woke. But, as usual, things spiraled out of control. A part of him had expected as much, to be honest. Due to the flood of information, he entered a deep sleep and was unable to wake up naturally, or even through Mary's probing. But, though the nap ended up being longer than anticipated, it did not go on for too long. Around his 8th hour sleeping, something clicked and Lex suddenly woke up fully ready for a fight. His instincts had always been a large contributing factor to his survival. Heck, back in the crystal realm, they had even warned him about attention he received from an Earth immortal. Back then, he had sensed an unknown danger approaching. Right now, in his sleep, Lex's instincts suddenly kick in, and with much greater clarity than ever before. It was as if previously his instincts would only vaguely point him in certain directions, but now it was using short sentences to explain the problem. The moment Lex woke up, he knew exactly what his instincts were picking up, and he could even trace it to its origin. To his north, something had clear and concise malicious intentions towards him specifically, and had the ability to threaten him. Using the host attire, he extended his vision all the way to the boundary of the inn, but the danger was beyond it. Lex did not think they would become a real threat, but very much believed that they could become a nuisance. Lex instructed Luther to take the Silent Wanderer, as well as a group of stronger workers, including Frederick, to go and inform the Empire that they were encroaching on owned territory. He strongly doubted that they would comply so easily, but he hoped they would. It was best if things were handled peacefully. While he was still deciding on whether to act against such civilizations on the grounds of morality, he was absolutely firm in his decision to act if they wanted to become enemies. A part of Lex wondered why it was so easy for him to acclimatize to such a brutal way of life. He never had that mental breakdown that he'd often read about characters having when they kill for the first time. He didn't suffer from that whole identity crisis of taking another life either. He shrugged as he couldn't come up with an answer. Maybe the boomers were right. Maybe playing video games had turned him into a desensitized monster. Or maybe he just felt such thoughts were pedantic, and a product of modern society on Earth. He doubted people in olden times spent so much time thinking of such things. Luther set off with Cirque, Gerard, Z, Chad, Leonidas, the leader of the next battalion Lex was forming, Jace, the in-worker who had earth powers, Sandra, the worker who could control electricity, and Alfonso, the kid who had unlimited food in his pockets. There were about a dozen more workers who joined them, all old members of the old battalion. Compared to the number of invaders, this was too few. But Lex seriously doubted they'd face any problems. Just in case they did, he'd be paying attention and would teleport over immediately. But until then, he had other issues to personally deal with, starting with the invasion of potatoes. They had displaced countless animals and beasts, and though Lex did not understand why they were dangerous, he did not want to let them spread unchecked. He would consult the turtle first to see if it had any